Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we explore your questions to help you make meaningful connections with teenagers, because no teen deserves to feel alone. Have a question you'd like us to address? Email us at podcast@teenlife.ngo. Now, let's jump into this week's question.
How do I stop drama without getting pulled into it? That is our question this week, and boy, howdy, that's a doozy, because this is going to be, not even sure I know the answer to this. So basically what we're trying to talk about this week is how do we as mentors and adults and maybe school staff help hear the teens, but also stop the gossip from happening around schools. So gossip grows in an emotional chaos, and adults can either contain it or amplify it. And we're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to start with Karlie. How about you?
Yeah, I think this topic is so difficult because this gossip is not something that ends with teenagers. I think we often talk about it around teenagers, but adults do this too. And so, and I'll be honest, anytime I'm around a teenager and she's talking about a boy she likes, I'm like, bring it on.
Oh,
what do you
man.
got? Like, I am like let's go. Like, I want to hear all the details. And so I think sometimes, especially if emotions are high, people want information, and gossip is what we do to fill in the gaps. But I also think as adults, it's really easy to become part of the problem. It's really easy to continue the cycle and make it worse. And then you're going, okay, I was the adult and I probably should have helped shut this down. And instead, I made it worse. And I think especially in school settings, if kids are talking in classrooms or in the hallways about stuff and you pick up on something and then you go take it to someone else, and then that wasn't even true, you didn't verify any of that information, and then it can also spread and get kids in trouble and become an even bigger monster than it was. So have y'all ever, like thinking back to high school, have you ever been on the bad end of like gossip or a rumor?
Oh, yeah.
That you can think of?
Yeah.
I have a very vivid memory. I think I was a senior in high school, and a bunch of kids got in trouble at a party, and somehow it got passed around that I was the one that snitched. And I was like, it was like end of my senior year, and they weren't really good friends, but like people stopped talking to me, and I was like, I didn't do anything. What do you mean? Like, where did this come from?
I wasn't even invited to this party. I didn't even know it existed.
I actually think I was invited. I just didn't come. Like, it was like it just happened to be like anyways, it was one of those things where I was like, man, that kind of stinks at like my word against what had become like 15 people's words that because they heard it from one person started spreading it. And then there's not really anything I could have done at that point.
Yeah, I can't think necessarily either the rumor never got back to me, or by the time like it did, it was right. Like I was like, oh yeah, no, I did that. No, that was me. And I don't know, maybe I just didn't care enough, I guess, at that point. But no, I can't think of necessarily a great example of that. But I think it's a good question to ask ourselves, like, why do teens gossip? And I also think there's, and maybe we'll get to this later, but there's a distinction, I think, even like as adults of like, okay, like this is harmful gossip, right? Like this is right. We're talking about other people that aren't in the room, or like,
or I'm
you've
even
heard
knowingly spreading
Yes.
something I know is not true to hurt them.
Right. And I also think there's, like you brought up, like, a student or a kid or a friend of one of your kids is talking about, oh, I like so-and-so. That's like, okay, yeah. Keep that to yourself, but like, hey, it's all right. Yeah, tell me more. But I think especially if they're talking about somebody else, it's like, okay, right? Like how can I stop this? How can I help them process? But I think there's reasons kids and students are gossiping. I think can usually fall into like three categories. Like, as always, anytime we talk about why teens do things, it's usually because they want to belong, right? And like, if information is power, then it's a resource to be leveraged of like, oh, did you hear so-and-so? And it's like, oh man, listen, even as an adult, if I have information that no one else in my friend group has, it's like, oh man, I am king right now. I am king. And so students feel that they get a sense of belonging, of power, and then anxiety relief of like, hey, we're talking about somebody else. It's not me. Like,
Right.
That's a big win. And so there are reasons that they're doing it, but just because there's reasoning behind it doesn't mean that it's good and should continue.
Right. Yeah. It's not always malicious, or it's not
Right.
always like them trying to hurt someone. Sometimes it's just easy to get sucked in. And I also remember that feeling, especially as a teenager, when someone around you starts gossiping, you don't want to be the person that's like, don't talk about them
Yeah.
that way, or like, I don't want to hear your gossip. So
Yeah.
I get it. It's very easy to be pulled in.
Yeah, and I think the misconception too is that gossip is always not true, and that's not the case. Sometimes the gossip is true, and it's just people have information, and unfortunately, in this world, when you have information, you have power. And the problem with it, though, is that even if it is 100% true when you get it, by the time it gets around to the third, fourth, 20th person, it's kind of like the game of telephone. There's no telling what it's
Yeah.
escalated to. And especially whenever it gets to uh, things that are inappropriate or possibly illegal, like that affects people's lives. And so that's kind of the scary thing about it, is that, every time that it gets through a person, they're going to make the story what it needs to be for them to
Yeah.
get more attention, or just to get more juice out of it. Um, and then motives get assigned, like emotions escalate, and then we just don't really like, that's when everything's got out of control. It's kind of like a fire starting in a corner of a room, and next thing you know, it's all over the house. So social psychologists, they call this rumor amplification, and so that by the time the story reaches the person it's about, it often sounds completely different than how it started. And that's whenever, if you're the person that it's about, your world crashes, because how do you even contain that at that point? And
Right.
so when teens feel misrepresented or attacked, that's when the conflict kind of gets to its height.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
When I think this is also where adults get pulled in, often unintentionally,
Yes.
because they're like, I want to fix this. I want to help. But then sometimes it's also like, hey, let me tell you what I heard. And you maybe in the teacher's
Yeah.
lounge, maybe texting thread with other parents, like you kind of like all combine what you've heard. Or I can't believe that if a teenager's telling you something, you're like, I can't believe that she did that. What you just did is validate them sharing something that maybe
Yeah.
they shouldn't. Or if you're ever having to tell someone, hey, don't tell anyone. But especially out of the context of like, hey, this is and let me be very clear. There is a difference between this being a safety issue. There's a difference
Mm.
between this being your job, that you have to get to the bottom of something, and like maybe overhearing something in the hallway that there was a fight between two teenagers, and you're going to your teacher friend or someone else going, guess what I just
Mhm.
heard. I think he cheated on her because she was so upset. And that maybe wasn't even what they were arguing about. And it's just little ways like that things started. Or maybe you pass on the wrong name. Like I've heard of this recently of a student that administration heard that something was happening and they passed on a name, and then maybe 30 minutes came back and was like, no, not that kid. But that could be, like you
Yeah.
said, Tobin, that could be very damaging. Even if you come back and say it wasn't, if it gets to the wrong person, in the back of their mind, they'll always think, oh, that's the kid that did this. And you just put a target on someone's back that didn't deserve it. And so
Yeah.
we've got to be careful.
And like I get the temptation, right? Like even as a youth leader, things like that of like, I mean, even the sense of belonging, I think even is true to adults,
Hmm.
like with each other, and then even with our teens of like, man, like I want to fit in, but it's like, man, right? Like if I can play into, oh, like what's going on in their